Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back with a brand new Papo release. It's not every day we get to say that because it seems as though over the last few years, any sort of production from Papo has been a lot slower than it used to be, and in fact they seem to really struggle to even get their figures out through the year, especially considering we are in December and this is the first 2024 figure to actually release. The other two won't even be releasing until next year from what I've been told from Everything Dinosaur. So, you know, the very much so anticipated Suchomimus unfortunately doesn't seem to be coming this year like it was supposed to, but we do at least have this one, which is the Ampelosaurus, and it's very cool to have another sauropod from Papo. Definitely something that I'm sure many people were hoping for over the last few years. A lot of the releases we've had have been pretty lackluster and pretty darn ugly, like the Concavinator and stuff like that. But, and the Protoceratops, who could forget that? But this figure doesn't look half bad. I will definitely say it's certainly not the best figure to come from them, or at least it's not the best one that was supposed to come for this year, even though clearly this is the only figure we're really going to get this year. But it's definitely not the greatest version of this species by no means. But I feel like it is kind of a step in the right direction for Papo because the overall design isn't nearly as ugly as a lot of the designs have been over the last few years. And if we go ahead and get nice and close to the head sculpt, you can see the head sculpt looks okay. It doesn't look half bad. You've got an open mouth for the dinosaur, so you can see the teeth and everything in there. We could see the nostrils up here on the snout. We can also see the eye is painted pretty nicely. Nice black pupil, kind of has a little shine to it, so it sort of has that eye shine. We can see the ears back here, and the ears are highlighted with a darker tone, which is a plus. We basically have a gray for the upper body and then a lighter tone for the lower body. I will say the paintwork does look fairly decent for this figure, definitely better than a lot of the figures we've had over the last few years, but I feel like they could have used a little more in, you know, the majority, honestly, of the figures. So specifically what I'm talking about is we have this nice dark wash moving over the back of the dinosaur, which doesn't look half bad. Maybe it's a little too intense. But when you come down here into the lower part of the figure, I feel like it's really quite dull. Like it almost seems, I'm not really sure how to put it, just too clean. It just is like, there's no real life to the paintwork. It's fairly smooth as far as the application goes, but I just feel like maybe a little more depth or something like that could have benefited the figure when it comes to the paint. It does still have the dark wash in certain areas, because like you can kind of see it right here, but I feel like the large amount of the figure could have definitely used maybe a dark wash, at the very least just a little more paint variation or something along those lines to it, but it doesn't look terrible. It just could have looked a little better. But as you lead into the mouth, I will say I'm not a big fan of the teeth. They seem way too sharp to me. They almost look like predator teeth, especially if we turn it around. And you look over here, I feel like some of those teeth have a pretty genuine sharp look to them. So they don't look very good as far as that goes. I definitely would have preferred they looked a little more like herbivore teeth, but you can see the inside of the mouth has a nice dark reddish tone in there, nice gloss coat. Not a whole lot in the way of fine detail it looks like in there, but it looks okay. The teeth paint, looks okay. Doesn't look too bad. Wasn't sure if it was sloppy. No, it looks alright for the most part. Maybe slightly sloppy, but not by much. It's a little hard to focus my camera in there for some reason. There, we can see it a little better right there. Like you can see the paintwork of the teeth on the inside of the mouth is definitely a little sloppy. In general, actually, you can see that reddish tone is a little sloppy as far as the application goes. But it's not terrible because it's such a small area, you're not really going to see it too well anyway. But as you begin to move down through the course of the figure, you can see again we've got all sorts of really large kind of bumpy scales like osteoderms and stuff up here on the top. You can also see a line of ridges following down along the back of the neck. They are painted out with a lighter tone. They do also have a dark wash applied to them, like a dark brown wash it looks like, to give them a little variation of color. As you move down through the side of the neck, you can see the skin texture does look pretty good, and I feel like, you know, outside of the fact that what I was saying with like the lacking of like a wash, the paintwork does look pretty good. It's really quite smooth, and as I turn it, you can kind of see a little variation of color. Kind of looks like maybe there's a super light dry brushing of a lighter tone over the grayish areas, which, once you get it into a nice light, does look okay, I guess. The underside, though, almost looks naked as far as the paintwork, because you can see we basically have like a light tan, and that's it. Like, there's not really much else going on when it comes to the paintwork down here. You can see the throat and everything looks pretty good, though. You can also kind of see like some skin here kind of sagging within the chest area of the dinosaur. Not too much, but like it seems like the legs are kind of pushing together into the chest and really scrunching that skin up right there. We do also have the tag from Papo on here, so I need to get that off because it's driving me nuts. There we go. So now you can see again the skin looks pretty decent as far as the detailing goes. You've got some nice kind of wrinkling as you move down, and again you have a little bit of a turn to the neck of the dinosaur, and they've shown that off pretty nicely. The transition between colors is definitely really natural, really smooth, which is a plus. The skin texture continues to look okay, and obviously we have this very bumpy look to the dinosaur up here on the back. You've got the line of ridges moving down along the back of the dinosaur, which there's like extra fuzz or something, I guess, that was in the packaging as this arrived again just a few moments ago from Everything Dinosaur. But as you move down, you can see the osteoderms and everything moving along the back. They don't look great, but they don't look bad. The paintwork of the ridges and stuff you can see is pretty sloppy, like doesn't match up perfectly as you move through the figure. It's not the worst I've ever seen, but it's kind of like typical modern Papo when it comes to their paintwork. I remember there was a time where Papo paintwork was like the top of the line, and now unfortunately this is pretty much your standard when it comes to the paintwork of Papo. But outside of that, the paintwork looks okay, but there's not really a whole lot that they could mess up on this up here in the back, because basically we just have the same grayish blue sort of tone, and then we have a dark wash that's been applied, and you can see it does definitely help to highlight all of the detail. Back here you have gigantic I don't know if you would call them osteoderms or what. It just looks like a bunch of giant rocks on the side of the dinosaur, which is pretty impressive when it comes to that area of detailing. Definitely helping to give this one quite the armored look for sure. As you move along the back of the dinosaur, you can again see all of those ridges moving down and the nice variation with the brown wash that's applied, which I think does look pretty good. Obviously, it would have been nice to see the paint of these ridges be a little bit more careful, a little more specific, because it basically doesn't just paint out the ridges, it paints the entire back in the area. Like you could see it in between the ridges down on the back. So it looks like obviously they've applied a little bit too much paint to that area, but again, it's not the end of the world, and once you kind of move further away, it's not so noticeable. As you move down through the front leg, you can see the muscle definition looks quite impressive. Leading down, the skin texture also looks pretty good. You've got the elbow on the back of the leg right there. As you move down into the foot sculpt looks okay. You do have one nail hanging out here on the side, painted with a black. Again, a little sloppy as far as the paintwork goes, but not the end of the world in that area either. But as you move up, the transition here doesn't look quite as smooth. Like here, you can see it's a really smooth and natural transition. Here, it's a little more abrupt, and you can definitely see it looks more like paint than body color. And also, there's like some sloppiness with the dark washes kind of showing up right there. But those are just basically minor nitpicks. Overall, I think it looks all right. The skin texture looks pretty decent in that area. As you move back here into the rear leg, you can see again the muscle definition of the thigh and calf leading down. A little bit of folding of the skin in the back of the knee. And then as you lead down to the foot sculpt, again, the nails are just really sloppy as far as the paintwork goes. I'm not really sure what happened to Papo when it comes to the precision of their paintwork. Their paintwork used to be so nicely applied, and now it's always just so sloppy. Whatever factory they're going with, they need to start looking elsewhere, because this one's not working out too well for them. But as you move back up into the tail, you can see again the dark wash leading out here. But as these bumpy sort of, armored osteoderms disappear, as does that dark wash, and then you lead out through the rest of the tail, and you can see it basically looks as it did in the neck, where we have the lighter tone for the underside, and then you have those kind of bluish grays for the upper side, as well as the ridges moving along the back of the tail, and they are painted out again with that light tone, kind of like a light like a tan or an off-white. One thing that is cool, though, I will say, is as you move out, there are some really subtle variation of color that you almost don't even notice. Obviously, they used an airbrush to just apply some really subtle variation of color, adding a little depth to the paint job, moving out through the length of the tail. I wish I would have seen more of that through the figure, actually. It would have been pretty cool. But there's also a nice curve to the tail as you lead out. As you lead along the underside, you can see again some wrinkling and folding of the skin, leading through some decent skin texture. Not really much in the way of variation of color, and you can continue to see sloppiness because I feel like the grays that we see down here on the underside are probably not meant to be there. It seems as though whenever they were painting the legs with the airbrush, they just kind of got paint down here and then said, oh well, let's just move on. Like right here, really, you can see it again on the underside. So definitely sloppy paintwork for sure on this figure, which I don't know, it kind of, upsets me, kind of terrifies me to think of what could come of that Suchomimus, because the Suchomimus looks so nice when it comes to the prototype, but the prototype compared to the actual factory-released version is always drastically different from Papo, so I'm terrified to think of what could happen with the paint apps of that one. But as you move back here through the course of the dinosaur on this side, you can see again the head sculpt looks pretty decent. The paintwork of the eye is randomly a little sloppy though. But as you move down through the neck, you can see pretty much the same thing on this side as we saw on the initial side. Again, the paintwork I think looks pretty decent in the neck of the dinosaur. As you lead down, you've got some skin wrinkling and stuff leading into this front leg. The leg here, you can really see tensing. The muscle definition shining quite nicely over here. It looks as though this leg is about to take a step. This leg is maybe coming down, and that's why we see so much tensing, because again it would be supporting the front half of the dinosaur. But oddly enough, you can see what appears to be like the wash applied, or again dry brushing applied over here. That looks really good. I feel like if they would have done this through the entire figure, it definitely would have livened up this tone of color through the body. That looks pretty decent. And then as you move down, again, the foot sculpt looks okay. We do have the nail kind of hiding over there, which is hard to see. Again, the stomach here looks awkward as far as the transition goes. And there's always like this little area of sloppiness right here with like the wash where it seems like it shouldn't be, or maybe even a dry brushing in that area that just looks awkward. I don't know what they're doing in that spot, but it always looks awkward. There is a little bit of a lighter yellow right here as well compared to what you see down here, which is more of like a light brown, and then you have a bright yellow right there, which looks okay, but I'm not necessarily a huge fan of that either. And then we move back again into the rear leg, and you can see how the rear leg is kind of outstretched. Again, sloppiness with the nail paint, like sloppiness galore, almost looking bootlegish as far as the paintwork of the nails goes. Wow, that's really, really bad. And then we move back up again into the tail as you lead out with the nice curvatures of the tail. So it's kind of a mixed bag. It is a fairly decent looking sculpt. It's not obviously your most accurate version of this species, but it's just got kind of half sort of decent paint, half pretty sloppy paint. So definitely not the greatest painted figure from Papo, but you can really see that subtle application of the paint right there. It's almost like a striping effect moving out through the tail, like a really subtle striping, which is pretty cool. As far as the size goes, I can definitely say it's pretty sizable. Lengthwise, you are looking at about 16 3/4 inches, maybe even a hair over, or approaching 43 centimeters, but not quite there. And then for a height, we're going to have to move it back a little bit, and then come in here and measure up there to the top of the neck. You are looking at just under 6 inches, or a little hair over, around 15 centimeters. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, Robert Muldoon, and the Collect A human being next to our Papo Ampelosaurus. And you can see it looks alright in size. Definitely, again, not gigantic, but bigger than I was expecting for some reason. And you can definitely see that there next to Mr. Papo T-Rex, who is a pretty big figure himself. But again, it's one of those instances where you can look over at Mr. Papo T-Rex, and although that's not the greatest painted figure from Papo, it's still not bad. And you could just see such a massive difference in paint quality compared to the newer stuff. It's sad to see, but it seems like it's just going to be the world we live in moving forward. We've also got a few randoms with the Safari LTDU Tyrannus and Schleich Diabloceratops next to our Papo Ampelosaurus. And when it comes to a Papo-sauropod comparison, here is the Ampelosaurus next to their Brachiosaurus, and you can see Obviously, the Brachiosaurus is going to be a lot larger, but the Ampelosaurus still, again, has a pretty decent size to it. Definitely one of their larger figures. And there aren't all that many figures out for this species, but one of the best overall would be the Howlong Good version. And you can see standing next to the Papo version, they're pretty similar in size, with the Papo version being obviously a little bit bigger, but not by a whole lot. And then for another random Paposauropod, we also have their Amargasaurus next to their Ampelosaurus to kind of give you another idea of the size. And then just a few random Papo comparisons. We have the Parasaurolophus, which you can see is obviously a whole lot smaller. They're quite iconic Triceratops next to the Ampelosaurus as well. And then, of course, the last offering of the Spinosaurus from Papo, which you can see is kind of similar in size, with the Spino being just a little bit bigger. And then again, with just some more random sauropod comparisons, we have the Safari LTD Camarasaurus, which you can see is kind of similar in size with being just a little bit bigger. And then one final comparison with the Invicta Diplodocus next to the Ampelosaurus from Papo, just to kind of give you one more final idea of the size. So this brand new Papo Ampelosaurus figure is definitely a mixed bag, and that's pretty much the way it works for any Papo release anymore, it seems. But the sculpt is okay, it's got some pretty decent detail, it's definitely fairly highly detailed, maybe not quite as highly detailed as I'm used to when it comes to Papo, but it's not too far off, and I like the fact that they have kind of finer skin texture through a lot of the body, because that also helps when you get to the back of the dinosaur to really show off that kind of armored look. So the finer skin texture playing off of the much more rugged skin texture of the back just looks pretty cool. The paintwork of the figure, though, is the biggest problem, because again, it's just sloppy for the most part through the entire body, and it's crazy because there's not even that much that they really had to do to this one, and again, it's still found a way to be sloppy, especially in the nails of the figure is really sloppy, but even painting out some of the ridges and stuff up on the back is quite sloppy. I do like the very subtle application of kind of like striping down the tail, and just some little areas where you'll notice some slight variation of color. Does look pretty good, but I feel like overall the paintwork isn't all that naturalistic looking, and definitely could have been better. If we go back in time and we take this figure and we have old school Papo make it, I feel like it would have turned out a lot nicer as far as the paintwork goes, but it is what it is, I guess. It's just the way it works with Papo nowadays. The other thing is I'm not a big fan of the teeth. I think they could have looked better. But again, it is a Papo figure. You're never going to find an accurate dinosaur, it seems, with Papo, so I'm not surprised that this one has a little bit of an exaggerated, a little bit of kind of like, you know, an artistic kind of look to it. But overall, it's not the greatest figure in the world by no means, but it's probably one of the better figures to come from Papo over the last few years, at least if you take a look at this in comparison to that Concavinator and Protoceratops. Again, this one's a whole lot nicer than those figures were. So if you are interested in grabbing it and adding it to your collection, I will include a link in the description to where you can purchase it from Everything Dinosaur, because that is exactly where I purchased mine. So make sure you check that link, go grab this figure, and like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.